Good evening. This is the Select Board for a regular meeting on Tuesday, November 30th, right before another night of town meeting. So we must conclude our business by no later than 6:45 p.m. So we will do our best because we have an ambitious agenda. Any announcements by Select Board members? Okay. Then moving into public comment. Anyone signed up for public comment in advance?
Nobody has signed up in advance, and I do see Paul Warren with his hand raised. I'm not sure if that's for public comment or not.
I think he wants to speak on his amendment, so let's wait
Okay.
on that. You don't get two bites at the apple. We'll just give it another minute to see if anybody else wants to speak for public comment. And I do apologize, Paul, if you want to speak on something else. I'll give you an extra minute if that is the case. So we'll move into miscellaneous. If there are no objections. Okay, let's first approve the meeting minutes from November 23rd. Any changes, edits? Okay, all those in favor of approving the meeting minutes from November 23rd, 2021. Raul.
Aye.
John.
Aye.
Miriam.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Next, 4 different items, approving a temporary all alcohol beverage non-sales license. Oh, sorry, I skipped ahead a little too much. Approving an extra work order in the amount of $3,354.28 for accessibility improvements, linking the Brookline Housing Authority residences to the Gateway East project's universally accessible pedestrian facilities. Approving a temporary all alcohol beverage non-sales license to Lars Anderson Auto Museum to be held on Thursday, December 2nd for a VIP corporate dinner from 5:30 to 11 p.m. at 15 Newton Street. 25 people are expected. Approving a temporary wine and malt beverage non-sales license, again to the same auto museum, for Thursday, December 8th for a holiday party from 5:30 p.m. to 11 p.m. 40 people are expected for that event. And then finally approving a temporary wine and malt beverage non-sales license to the same auto museum to be held on Friday, December 10th for a holiday party from 5:30 p.m. to 11 p.m. 65 people are expected to attend that event. All those in favor? Raul?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Miriam?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. And now we go into warrant articles. I understand that there have been 2 amendments related to warrant article 10. Since I now know that Paul Warren is attending, why don't we take up his amendment first? I don't know if all of my select board members are aware of this amendment. I was expecting to see Melissa, but I can do my best to describe the what that amendment is proposing to do.
Melissa's being promoted now.
Oh, great.
Yep. Oh, she's still on the attendees list.
I just promoted Melissa.
Great.
Good
Hi,
evening.
Melissa.
How are you?
Good.
So there are 2 amendments that have been filed under Article 10, and then there is also an amendment filed under Article 27. So Article 10, the Warren Amendment essentially is looking to provide that any deliberations that occur during a hybrid meeting would be visible to town meeting members and the public. And if Paul is here, I will let him explain that one. And then the Selwyn Amendment has to do with the display of votes during a hybrid meeting. And, I've been on an email thread where there've been some discussion about some complications and polling systems that may or may not be able to accomplish that goal. So those are the two amendments that you have in front of you.
Great. I did agree because Paul asked for a time to speak. Paul, you have up to 3 minutes to speak, and I will hold you to that time because we do have much to cover.
Of course. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm on my phone, which is a new experience for me with Zoom. So thank you, Paul Warren, Precinct 1. I will make this very quick. As a stay-at-home dad raising 2 young children, I support the goal of Article 10 and hybrid town meetings. However, I felt compelled to file this amendment after learning through several channels that scores of our town meeting
Recording in
members
progress.
have been actively deliberating in a private chat group during most of our Zoom town meetings. Our form of legislating through town meeting depends on deliberation that is transparent and accessible to both town meeting members and the public. The transparent public nature of our deliberation ensures that we have the trust and confidence of the public. Unfortunately, the move to remote town meeting created the opportunity for town meeting members to gather in a private chat room to deliberate amongst themselves while town meeting is in session. Quite honestly, it seems understandable to me that this would happen, since we are sitting in front of our screens for several hours straight during these sessions. It's natural to want to reach out to others. However, these private group chats among voting members of town meeting have created an unintended consequence. Important and relevant deliberation that may influence the votes of many town meeting members are taking place outside the view of town meeting and the public. Large-scale private conversations during town meeting that influence voting decisions are not good democratic practice. These private deliberations impede the transparency we expect from our town meeting sessions, and they undermine the accountability and trust in the system. Let me be very clear about something. We do not need to caricature this amendment into absurdity. It's not about clarifying text to a friend asking which motion we are voting on first. It isn't about your right to speak your mind at town meeting. It's about a large private group deliberation taking place during town meeting sessions that isn't transparent. The Warrant Amendment makes it clear that the expectation of all town meeting members is that our deliberations are fully transparent to town meeting and the public. Please ensure that town meeting remains transparent, accessible, and accountable by voting positive action on the Warrant Amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. That was under 3 minutes, well under. Thank you very much. I saw a chat indicating that Lee Selwyn might be available and wanting to speak. If so, promote him. We'll give him 3 minutes, but I'll recognize Bernard since his hand is up. You'll have to unmute yourself, Bernard.
Hey, I apologize. I had a little trouble getting on to the Zoom. One quick question. Don't we have the ability to have those deliberations when we have a in-person town meeting? I mean, people go down to the cafeteria all the time and chit chat.
Sure, Bernard, if that's a question for me. Yeah,
Well,
I'm happy.
so Paul, I'm not gonna get into back and forth.
Okay.
I'm gonna give Lee an opportunity to speak. I have a few comments. We can talk as a board, and if I deem it appropriate, I will recognize Paul. But Lee, you have up to 3 minutes to talk about your amendment.
I'll try to keep it under 3. I have been concerned about the issue of transparency of voting during town meeting since we started Zoom meetings almost now 2 years ago. And the problem was sort of brought to a head on November 18th when earlier that week we had an IT meltdown, and we actually had to cancel the first night of town meeting because of it. And on Thursday the 18th, for whatever reason, I did not discover until Friday afternoon when Ben Kaufman circulated the preliminary voting record for that night, that none of my votes on the night of the 18th had been recorded. So I promptly sent him an email indicating what my votes were, which then generated an email from the assistant moderator advising me that it was too late to change my votes during the special town meeting because the special town meeting had been dissolved. Effectively, I had no way of knowing that my votes weren't recorded until the following day, and had no way to to correct the problem because that special town meeting, STM2, had been dissolved. So I submitted this amendment. Actually, I had originally proposed two approaches, one which would require the provision of voting information in real time during town meeting to remote as well as to in-person participants. And that would enable somebody who discovered that their vote wasn't recorded or wasn't recorded correctly to report it before dissolution, which would be the normal practice for an in-person town meeting. My second proposal was that motions to dismiss would be deemed to take effect at the end of the first full business day following the distribution of the preliminary voting results. The moderator has ruled that beyond scope. So the only thing before you right now is a proposal that would require that voting be reported in real time. Lexington apparently has an app that actually accomplishes this. There may be other solutions,
You have
but
30 seconds.
I don't see how we can proceed with remote access to town meeting without making some sort of accommodation to the process by which votes are cast and reviewed and reported. And either of my two proposals or both would go a long way, but unfortunately, one of them is not before you tonight. So I would hope that you would support the one that is. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lee. So here are my thoughts, at least. Well, and actually, I want to ask Melissa a question about Lee's amendment. Have we talked to the IT department about whether or not we have these capabilities yet? How difficult and what would the timeline be to address what he's proposing?
So I think it's a little premature to say that we have a solution for this problem. I know that the moderator is talking about kind of assembling a similar group as was done at the beginning of when we were looking to explore hybrid or remote meetings, kind of picking the platform and how it was going to work. So I could envision a similar group kind of exploring voting options. You know, we know that Zoom has a voting feature. We know that there are other apps out there, but whether or not they can accomplish what Lee's trying to do, especially where we have two different systems that then would need to be employed for in-person and then another system for remote. It's very complicated. So I would just caution you. I know that the moderator has expressed some concerns about being able to achieve these goals and whether or not they need to be prescribed in this article. But I'll leave that up for the board as they, kind of have their discussions on this.
Thank you. I personally, and I'll only speak for myself right now, I think that this idea, I totally understand the frustration, especially since I've seen people have difficulty with the electronic remotes when we're in person and they simply go up to the town clerk or they contact the town clerk and they are able to rectify their vote if it is not cast appropriately or recorded appropriately. So I'm a little surprised to hear that there was no remedy for the situation that you found yourself in, Lee. But I don't think that this is ready for prime time. So I'm not inclined to vote favorably to put this as part of our main motion, but I would be interested in creating a working group with the moderator to try to find a way for us to address this issue. Any other comments by other select board members? If you, Raul and then Miriam.
Yeah. Well, I'll keep it short too. I'll just say that I agree with those comments, and I think the spirit is right. I think that, what you have there would be beneficial. I just worry that it puts us in a position where if we aren't able to have this technology available, then folks are going to start questioning whether or not we have a legitimate town meeting being run right now. And I'd like to know that that's all set first before putting anything in the bylaws in this way. The other piece on the well, maybe I'll just hold. I'll say that, and if we want to address Paul's amendment separately, I can do that after.
Thank you. Miriam?
Well, I'm going to keep it short too. And I echo both what Heather and Raul said, which is, I think the thinking is right, but I think this is one of those that, perfect is the enemy of good situations. We know it's something that needs to be done, but I think the concern is that it keeps us from having hybrid town meeting. And I just don't want to see that happen. I think we need to have hybrid town meeting. I think we need to solve this issue, but I think if we prescribe it into a part of the warrant article, then we are creating a situation in which we won't be able to have either of those things. So I applaud the thinking. I think it is something we need to fix, but I don't support writing it into the warrant article like this. I'm happy to talk about Paul's separately or now, whichever you prefer.
Well, let me just say what I have to say about Paul's amendment. I also see the reasoning behind this and can understand the frustration. But my understanding is town meeting is exempt from open meeting. And there are numerous examples where town meeting members get together, and whether it's PACs or Green Caucus or the town meeting member listserv that is not open to the public, we deliberate amongst ourselves in various ways that are not transparent to the greater public, whether that's good or bad. Everybody has their feeling on that. But I think that what you're trying to do is put town meeting in a position where we are now subject to open meeting, but that's not the current state law. So I probably can't support this just because I think that it's trying to address a state law as opposed to something about a hybrid town meeting. So I'll let other select board members weigh in. I'll give Paul and Lee 1 minute response once the select board members have said their thoughts. Raul and then Miriam.
Sure. Briefly again, I'll just say I think there are just so many different ways that folks that are deliberating on these issues find value in communicating with each other, whether it's one-on-one with another town meeting member, whether it's as a precinct, whether it's as I don't know if the Green Caucus has a chat or not, but maybe they do, or another caucus or group within town meeting. And I wouldn't want to prevent those groups from communicating with one another, or even individual or small subsets of town meeting members from communicating with each other, to sort of think collectively about how they might want to address what comes up during town meeting deliberations. It's just not something I support.
Miriam?
I echo again the two of you. I'd say I would add to that. I don't know how we define deliberation. I mean, what if your spouse, the person you live with, is also a town meeting member? We have several cases where, Carla and Dick Banka, right? So when they're having a conversation, is that a deliberation? Should that be open to the public? I think we're getting into a very dangerous territory in terms of how we define conversations and how we define even transparency. I think we're allowed to have conversations where we say, I don't understand that. Can you explain it to me? And not everybody needs to know that you didn't understand that. So I think it's an important part. I think transparency, obviously, I'm a huge fan of transparency. At the same time, I also think that we are not in a position to define deliberation. We are not in a position to silence people. And I think it gets to be into dangerous territory to do so. So I'm opposed to this amendment. But thank you, Paul, for bringing it.
I just want to give Bernard and John an opportunity to weigh in if they so choose before I recognize the two town meeting members who have filed these amendments. John.
Thanks very much. Heather, thanks also to Paul and thanks to Lee. I think both of these initiatives raise some interesting and maybe important questions. But I must admit on the question raised by Paul, I'm not sure because I do worry, as was just stated, that we're in an area now of limiting conversations in ways that are practically impossible to enforce and maybe not a good idea. Let's keep in mind that legislative bodies are unique in that they don't have to comply with the same open meeting law provisions as this select board. And the reason is that they're deliberative. So I underscore that word deliberative, talking to one another, exchanging ideas with one another. Unlike the members of this board, town meeting members are encouraged to, speak to each other as much as possible on as many occasions as possible. And sometimes that means, I'll give you an example, put aside virtual town meetings. During a town meeting at the high school, one can always text to, another town meeting member. There's all kinds of ways. Ideas worth exploring, especially Lee's, who could say no to trying to improve that voters at town meeting get their votes counted. But I don't think this is the vehicle for doing it. This is a home rule petition, which will probably in the legislature emerge as just one of many home rule petitions that influence how the legislature sets the rules for all municipalities. So I think we're going to have to deal with the issue raised by Lee, but I don't think this is the way to do it.
Bernard, did you want to say anything?
Well, only that I think that you made the appropriate point, and that is that town meeting is not subject to the open meeting law, and for a reason, which I think John suggested. It's a deliberative body. So I think that that's really the only thing I have to say about this.
Thank you. So Paul, I'll take you first and then Lee.
Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity to respond, and I appreciate all of your thoughtful feedback. It's greatly appreciated and heard. A couple of quick points. This really isn't about an individual member or a couple of members sitting around a cookie and having a conversation, right? This is an issue about scale and space. At town meeting, you could not have 40 people, and this is what's going on today. There's more than 40 people on a group chat during several of the past town meetings. And if 40 people were huddled in the corner of town hall, of the auditorium at the high school, having a discussion while town meeting was in session, having deliberation, the moderator would say, knock it off. If 60 people suddenly put their heads into their lap and started texting on their phones, the moderator would say, put the phones down, pay attention. There is something in the town meeting handbook that says you're only supposed to use your phones in order to access pre-printed material from the warrant. So this is really something that is not enabled in the space and time of in-person town meeting. Again, I reiterate, there are up to 60 or more town meeting members on a private chat thread together, deliberating and planning and responding to town meeting outside the view of the public. I think this is very detrimental to the course of town meeting, and it will give rise to all kinds of this type of thing going on. And suddenly we'll be deliberating very much the way the Senate does, a person at a podium speaking to an empty audience. I think it's very dangerous for our democracy. So, but I do appreciate the feedback and your consideration.
Thank you very much, Paul. Lee? You have about a minute and a half.
Thank you. The issue of dissolution occurring at the end of a town meeting and no corrections thereafter is something that is included in the town meeting handbook itself, which is a creation of the moderator. If we're going to have remote town meetings or remote participation in town meetings, we can't allow limitations in IT technology and voting technology to actually deprive people of voting, which was almost going to happen to me until Ben Kaufman managed to somehow find my votes. It's just, it seems to me that's entirely inappropriate. And again, I had proposed a simpler solution, which is to simply deem town meeting to not be dissolved until you have a chance to resolve these issues, something that you would not need to do if in a live town meeting, but you do need to do in a remote town meeting. That the moderator ruled that out of scope. We do know that Lexington is successfully running their remote meetings with the capability that I described in my amendment. And I have an email from Sandy that came over the weekend in which he suggested that apparently he thinks people in Lexington are more IT savvy than those in Brookline. I mean, that to me is not a good reason to reject this. The technology does exist. And at a minimum, you need to find a way, if you're going to have remote participation, to not put people in a position where their votes are going to be simply thrown away, as mine almost was. So I do think that this is an important capability that needs to exist if we're going to have remote participation. If you can solve this dismissal issue, that's sort of a short-term solution, and then develop a longer-term technology solution, although apparently the Lexington solution works. And I think the town meeting members in Brookline are smart enough to be able to deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you. So we should probably take a vote on these two amendments so that I can report the outcome when I speak on the board's behalf tonight at town meeting. So I will move first Lee Selwyn's, because it was filed last week, Lee Selwyn's amendment to Article 10. All those in favor of adding that to the warrant article, say aye. Bernard.
I'm going to vote aye because as a practical matter, this is not going to go into effect until the earliest Springtown meeting, and we should be able to fix this by that time.
Raul.
No.
John.
No.
Miriam.
No.
And the chair votes no. But I know Joe Cato, who is on the Lexington board, and I will reach out to him. I know he was instrumental in developing their electronic town meeting. Thank you for attending tonight, Lee. So next is the Paul Warren amendment to warrant Article 10. All those in favor of adding that language to the warrant article, say aye. Bernard.
Nay.
Raul.
No.
John.
No.
Miriam.
No.
And the chair votes no. Good luck tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, so I understand that we also have to take up warrant article 27. Melissa, do you just want to walk us through? I understand that they're very straightforward edits.
Sure, and John Doggett is here, but essentially what the amendment is trying to do is just make it clear that if a petitioner fails to put the financial impact on their article when they submit it, that does not mean that it won't be on the warrant. And so it's, just to emphasize that, and then some grammar changes as well.
Great. Any questions for Melissa or John? Did we lose Raul? Where did he go?
I'm reminding you that he has a commitment this evening.
Oh, right.
from
Okay.
5 to 6.
Right. Okay. Any discussion about these proposed edits? What was our vote the last time? Do you remember, Melissa?
I recall, if I may, Heather, 3-1-1, I believe.
Okay. Okay.
That's correct. With I think Raul abstained, and Bernard, I think, voted no. Oh no, I'm sorry. Miriam voted no, and Raul abstained.
Okay. Miriam, I see your hand up.
So
So
actually, I think I voted no, but I think Raul was on his honeymoon. Did he
Got it.
abstain, or was he
No,
not
he
present?
abstained.
Oh, he abstained. Okay. I actually have a question.
Yeah, of course.
I tried to chat it to you, but so I'm fine with the edits, but I'm going to vote no on the warrant article. So how do I mean, what voting no, voting yes here is
Got
just
it.
voting to tell me, somebody please explain to me.
Okay, maybe what we do is we take it in two parts. We vote on adopting this language as the main, although this isn't really our warrant article, is it?
But it's John's, right?
Yes, well, yeah, the ACs, I believe it's actually the ACs.
Okay.
Not play until
This
someone
version
moves
is not, and hopefully will be.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
the original petitioners want the change to the language.
Yes.
Right. So I support that, even though in the end I won't support the warrant article. So
Okay. So let's do this. We will take a vote in support of these changes, but then we will do a separate vote on our select board position recommendation to town meeting. And that way you can support the changes, but you can vote no on the on what we're recommending to town meeting. Okay. That's how we'll handle it. Okay, so that's the motion. First motion is to bring in alignment these proposed changes into what we are about to consider in our recommendation to town meeting. Is that clear? Okay, great. All those in favor, Bernard,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Miriam,
aye.
and the chair votes aye. And now this is the recommendation to town meeting on warrant article 27. All those in favor, Bernard,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Miriam,
No.
and the chair votes aye. Thank you for making yourself available tonight, John.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, moving into 10 Brookline Place. Kate, if you want to promote, it should be Sophia Robinson, maybe Paul Sainer. And while she is doing that, what I'll do is skip right over to board commission appointments. This is fairly straightforward. A bunch of appointments for the Brookline Village Parking Benefit District Advisory Board. We had a number of interviews recently. So unless there are any objections, I'm going to move 4 people to be appointed / reappointed to that. They are reappointment for Fred Perry for a term expiring in 2024, appointment of Emily Jacobson for a term expiring in 2024, appointment of Sarah Petrus for a term expiring in 2024, and appointment of Karen Flannery for a term expiring in 2023. All those in favor, Bernard,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Miriam. I believe that was an aye, and the chair votes aye. Thank you so much. So, Sophia, I see you. Do you have a mini presentation to do for us on 10 Brookline, please?
I do have a mini presentation. I will share my screen.
Great.
Okay.
So, Sophia, you just started in our planning department, correct?
Yes, I did. I started in, I believe, August.
Excellent.
So yeah, I'm new to New England, moved here from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and very excited to be here.
Great. Welcome.
Thank you. So I'm a new economic development long-term planner with the Department of Planning and Community Development. Tonight I'm going to be speaking to you about the 10 Brookline Place Committee, and I'll just jump right in. So just for context, wanted to show you 10 Brookline Place today. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. This is located in Brookline Village, across from Netta at the intersection of Washington and Boylston Streets. So some background on the committee. The committee, this is a product of many conversations between the Boylston Street Corridor Study Committee, as well as Bullfinch, who's the developer and applicant. And they've had a lot of back and forth around Bullfinch's design for the specific site. The committee is also an outcome of the EDAB Lab and BioLife Sciences report, which was presented to the Select Board on November 9th, a couple weeks ago. The committee charge and structure is going to be modeled after the successes of past similar committees. Some of note include the Welltower and Newbury College Committee, which took about 5 to 6 months from the appointment of the committee through the completion of recommendations to the Select Board, and the 2 Brookline Place Committee, which took between 6 and 10 months, depending on who you ask. The charge of the committee specifically, so they're going to be advising the Select Board. They'll be reviewing and proposing modifications to the redevelopment of the property itself. They'll be specifically looking at lab and life science and related uses for the site, which again is sort of a continuation of all this past built work. They're going to collect information specifically on potential impacts to sustainability, livability, and tax-based growth. And they'll use zoning and impact on the public realm as the main lens for that analysis. Some specific things that might be considered are community benefits and commercial linkage fees. The committee deliverables are pretty straightforward. So first, there'll be a proposed zoning amendment to create an overlay district for the area. There'll be a memorandum of agreement between the town and the property owner. And then there'll be the process at large will be advised by a real estate consultant and other consultants as needed. It's also worth noting here that the committee will not focus on architectural design, since that's the responsibility of the planning board and the designated design advisory team. The timeline here, so pending your appointment by the Select Board, the committee hopes to meet for the first time in January 2022, and then they hope to present their findings and recommendations to the Select Board 1 month prior to the close of the fall 2022 town meeting warrant. Quickly on community engagement, there'll be engagement throughout the entire process. And specifically, the process will seek to incorporate the newly published engagement goals from the planning department. I can speak to these more if needed, and these emphasize transparency and engagement, and then also incorporating the Government Alliance on Race and Equity's sort of framework for an equity lens in all steps of the engagement practice. Finally, we have the committee membership itself. You've all been provided with a list of the proposed committee members prior to this meeting, along with the charge. The committee membership is about 14 people. It includes people who live and work in Brookline Village, including several town meeting members. It also includes Brookline Village business community representatives and some employees, and includes professional expertise in architecture, transportation, sustainability, and real estate development. So that's everything that I have for you all today. And I'm happy to answer any questions, go back to anything that's needed.
Great. Thank you so much for keeping that a short and sweet presentation.
Great.
Any comments or questions by Select Board members? What I like about this committee is that it does not require a Select Board member to be part of it.
Heather, just so you know, that's it. That was the exact same comment I made to Paul when he called me to brief me.
I mean, there are so many things that we should be doing in town, but the fact that we have 5 volunteers that, you know, really just don't have the capacity to sit on every single thing. But we have to be very judicious because our staff will have to do a lot of work for this committee. So we're not going to do it in every single situation, but I believe 10 Brookline Place is in our top 5 of who pay the highest taxes here at Brookline. So to go from, I think their annual tax contribution will have the tax assessors here with us next. We can certainly confirm, but I've heard somewhere in the magnitude of about $2 million a year. That could be wrong. Through this process, we may be able to double, maybe even triple that. John, did you want to say something?
Yes, thanks very much. It's really been a privilege to serve as chair of the Boylston Street Corridor Study Committee. And part of that privilege was that this opportunity arose and in a small way, but I hope a helpful way, the committee played a part in kind of nurturing this along. And now it's time for a committee to take charge of the process of carrying it forward. The opportunity for Brookline is immense, because it isn't just about being part of what is such an important part of our local economy now, which is biolab development. It's happening in all kinds of surrounding communities. I don't have to go down the whole list, but Boston, Newton, Cambridge. There's no reason why it shouldn't happen in Brookline as long as it's done right. And with the talent that is on this committee, I think we have a good chance of coming up with a proposal that will be done right. I hope eventually it will win the support of people at town meeting. And it will be more than just a proposal for a development. It will be a proposal, excuse me, that has some linkage in it, that has opportunities for us to do something exciting with Brookline Housing Authority properties, which are directly across Boylston Street from 10 Brookline Place. And it presents the opportunity of perhaps stimulating some further development further down the corridor in that stretch from High Street to Brington Road, where again, with the right kind of nurturing, we could see some really exciting things happen. So I'm glad this has come this far, and I'm really hopeful for the future. There was so much talent that could be tapped for this committee that literally, even with a big committee, people who could have added to this committee, unfortunately, there just wasn't room for all the people who wanted to be part of this and who had so much to bring to this. But the group we have, I think, is a good group, and I'm excited about it.
Excellent. Thank you very much for helping Paul put this slate together, John. Any other discussion before we vote on it? Seeing none, I will move approval for the 10 Brookline Place hold on. The charge and the slate for the 10 Brookline Place Study Committee. All those in favor, Bernard?
I vote aye. And by the way, the tax that we collect is $2.3 million a year. So that's pretty great.
Nice to know I'm not off by that much.
And this will increase that amount.
Yes, hopefully. Fingers crossed. John?
Aye.
Miriam?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Thank you very much, Sophia, for that riveting presentation. Very tight.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, moving along to tax classification. Only happens once a year.
Can I just start out by saying your memo, Mel, was very, very helpful. Thank you.
So I will have to promote Rashid.
Just promoted Rashid and Justin.
Oh, excellent.
Good evening.
Good evening, Rashid.
Good evening, members of the board. Good evening. My name is Rashid Balasine. I'm the Chief Assessor. Joining me tonight, the members of the Board of Assessors, Dr. Hal Peterson and Mark Mazel. We're going to go through a brief presentation of some slides to guide you through the process of voting, probably not tonight, probably next week, on the two items. One is the shift factor that determines the proportion of the tax levy borne by each class of property, and also the percentage of the residential exemption. So if I can share my screen. That'd be good. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So there are two factors that determine the tax rate. First is the valuation, the total value, sum of the valuation of the town of all classes, which were certified recently by the DOR. And the second factor is the tax levy. First we'll go through show you the values, what the value changes from year to year, from prior year to this year. And then we show you how the tax levy is calculated. And from there, we'll go through the slides that will help you determine the actual tax rates. So these are the changes in valuation from fiscal year 21 to 22. We can see the residential still increasing a slight, about 3%, the commercial slightly down. Personal property is unusually high. That's due to mostly to utilities, mainly National Grid. And so total property, taxable property went up about 2.6%. Next slide shows the average value changes by class: single families, condominiums, apartments, commercials. Again, the residential still at steady increase, whereas the commercial and rental properties slightly down. These slides compare the 5 communities in Massachusetts, the 5 highest communities, and shows Brookline at the 4th position, the highest value community, right in front of Nantucket. And this shows also the composition of the tax base, commercial versus residential, and the tax rates. This is fiscal year 21 slide. Median values of residential values, steady increase from over the years, as we can see, not as strong as in prior years, but they're still increasing. Still demand for this type of properties, for residential properties. We get to the growth, which is part of the tax levy. This is the growth is a result of deconstruction, renovations, subdivisions, condominium conversions, and personal property. It is one of probably the highest amount we've increased since I've been here for the last quite a few years. So then we get to the second item of the tax rate calculation, which is the tax levy. Tax levy starts with a base levy established from the prior year. This is a base for fiscal year 22. Added to that, the 2.5% allowable under Prop 2.5, and then the growth we just saw added to that, which brings us to a maximum levy of 251 million. And added to that is the debt exclusion that are in place for the latest, for all debt exclusions that are that have been voted over the years by the residents, and that adds to sum up to the total levy at $272 million. So that is the tax levy for fiscal year 22. This is the number that we'll be using to calculate the tax rates. First, the residential exemption. Historically, the residential exemption had been at 20% since it started back in fiscal year 1982. Up till about 3 years ago, it was changed to 20. It was increased to 21%. The fiscal year 22 residential exemption is calculated through the total all residential value, number of residential parcels, the average value, and 21% of that is the new residential exemption of 310,620, which comes out of the assessment for owner-occupied property. That gives us the net taxable value. The next slide shows the impact of the residential exemption on the average value, which is the $1,479,000 we just looked at to calculate the residential exemption. This is before any classification. The tax bill without any classification at the residential factor of 1 and average value, the tax bill would be $14,315. But if we do choose the 21% residential exemption, the savings under that exemption will be about $1,400 for the average home value at $1,479,000. And again, coming down here, it shows the break-even value. This is where the cutoff of what the exemption does. Anything above this line, as you can see, it saves money by having the residential exemption for the homeowner. Beyond that, it really you don't save; you actually pay more if there was no residential exemption. So what we call a break-even value. Next, this is probably the most important slide of the evening. This shows we get to the tax shifts, shifting tax burden between class of properties. So a factor of the top section, the top line here, we see number one here. This is without shifting. If we say we have a factor, residential factor of 1, no shifting, the residential property will be responsible for 90.31% of the tax levy. And the commercial will be 9.68% of the tax levy. It's proportionate to their valuation, because the total valuation, residential value is the same percentage as 90%, same percentage, the total valuation. So at factor 1, this is what the classes will be responsible for. Now, the law allows to shift taxes between classes, and it allows to shift classes toward taxes toward the commercial sector, which will pay higher amounts than the residential. So shifting between the classes comes right here at the law allows to shift between 1 to 175. The maximum is 175. So we have several scenarios that are available for us to look at and possibly vote on one of them. So the 175, what we say about this slide is 175 at the maximum. It's taking this 9.60%, and brings it up to 16, close to 17%. So it makes shift commercial taxes from 9.6 to 16, 17, close to 17% onto the commercial sector, and it reduces the residential from 90% to 83%, and which determines the residential, the selected residential factor is 0.9196, and that is something we have to, that's one of the votes we have to take, you have to take. In the middle section, based, again, as you go from here towards the right side to the 170, if you shift from the highest to the lowest, you'll be shifting taxes towards the residential and relieving the commercial. And if you come back to the left towards the 175, it's the other way around. You're leaving the residential sector and making the commercial sector pay higher taxes. These are the middle section in red, are the new tax rates determined by this shift, these options here. We go from at 175, the residential tax rate will be at 1014. At 170 would be at 1020, 170.2. Whereas the commercial tax rate going from the highest at 1694 to the lowest at 1647. And then I'll skip this for a little bit, but I'll go down to the bottom. And those percentages in purple shows the increase in tax rate from prior year, from fiscal year 21. Again, starting at 175, the lowest residential percentage will be on under 175% increase in tax rate, and the highest will be on the commercial tax rate. As we shift to the right side, to the lowest factor, it goes highest tax, percentage increase in the residential sector versus the commercial. This here, when I say over, this shift at 1.714, this was the factor chosen last year, fiscal year 21. Unfortunately, it's not available to vote on this year. As you can see, this line here shows the excess capacity, levy capacity. And if we go over, which means we have to select, we have to raise more money than what was the target levy, it's not available. It's not available for as an option. It is over the levy, the target levy, which is a 272,124. Any other, all the other options are available for your vote. I can continue. There's a couple more slides, and we can give you the opportunity to ask any questions if you have any. The next slide, this slide here shows the actual tax dollars impact on the median values. The tax rate here is exactly the same factors we looked at, 175 to 170.02. These are the tax rates from the prior slides, right here from prior slide. And this is the impact on the median, on the various median properties, single families, residential condominiums, two families, three, multifamily and commercial. The 1, 2, 3 in condominiums, median values include the residential exemption at 21%. Again, I forgot to say this, but all these numbers are I'm showing you are based on the 21% residential exemption. If we decide to vote on the different percentages, then we'll show you the other options. But at this point, all these numbers are 21%. So the median residential single-family tax bill, these are in yellow will be the increases in tax dollars from prior year, from 21. As you can see, at 175, it's 1,271, and at 170.2, it's 1,362. What we notice here is the singles, twos, and threes see highest increase in tax dollars, percentage-wise, and tax dollars. That is due to two things. First is the shift and the value increase. The singles and twos and three families increased in value higher than the rest of the properties. So that's increase in market value. So we are already, by increasing their assessment, we're already shifting some of the tax burden onto those classes. The condominiums went up slightly, and market value has, again, also the residential exemption increased. So the condominium see a slight increase between 3 to 3.6% from the highest factor to the lowest. Whereas the rental apartment rentals, what we call apartment building, down here, seen a decrease in market value based on the reported vacancies and income that we received, and that their value went down slightly. So the impact of the taxes are a much lower percentage. Same with the commercial values. As you can see, the commercial at 175 will go up 4.9%. The median value down to 2% if we're at 170.02, which is pretty close to last year's factor. Last year's factor, chosen factor, was is at 2.7 increase. This next three slides are just a summary of this busy slide here that I just showed you. These are the summary.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
Sorry. No, back to the other slide. Do these numbers include the overrides? Like, is this the actual? It does. I see you shaking.
Yes,
okay.
it does. It does indeed. Yes. And so this just shows a summary of shows basically what the new tax amount per class for this shift factors. These are the percentage increases in taxes for the median and same single family, two family condominiums, 2s and 3s. Same thing with apartments and commercial property. This little percentages here shows the owner occupant, the percentage of properties owner occupied properties. As we can see, the single family is the highest owner occupied, and then goes condominiums. Surprising, but only 54% owner occupied out of the close to 11,000 units. And then the last slide, I had this slide earlier in the presentation, but I moved it to the end. I wanted to make sure that we pick the, this is the tax residential exemption amount at 21%, because now we went through the shift and the new tax rate. So I'm applying the tax rate at this factor, shift factor. These are the amount of the residential exemption in tax dollars at these various shifts. And the bottom is just historic amount, residential exemption amount in prior years. And that's it.
Great.
If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
I
Thank
actually have
you.
another question too.
Yes, Miriam.
So very, very early on, you referred to personal property. It was like on the first or second slide.
Yes.
And you then referred to the utilities, and that thoroughly confused me. Can you explain to me what that
Sure.
is and what you mean? I'm sorry.
Yes.
my first time
So
hearing
when I say utilities, is electric, gas companies, major utility companies, which are the highest value, the Boston Gas, National Grid, and Star, also known or Eversource now. We see the increase in value.
Property, I think, is what the question she's asking.
Yes. The personal property is again, it's mostly the highest values in personal property. The increases came from the utility companies, which is, again, like I said, gas companies, electric companies, and business tax personal property.
So when you say personal property, you mean that those utilities own property and we tax that property, and that's where this money comes from.
Exactly.
Got it. Because
Wires
that's
and poles and
a big change, right?
It's a big change.
Typical?
I'm sorry. No, it's not typical. This year, the National Grid, they're replacing their major pipelines, and that is valued. And so this is all new pipelines that are reporting, and in fact, they reported any new items put in are considered growth, and they reported a substantial amount of growth this year. And typically, we see a percent, maybe % or 2 increase year over year. This is quite substantial.
Great. Thank you very much for that explanation.
John.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rashid. Excellent presentation. If possible, I would love to have the slide put up that shows the impact on, say residential property owners, at the bottom line, what will be the impact on their tax bill this coming year. And then I'm just going to comment on that once we get that slide up. The reason I want to look at that is that the numbers in there, I think, might, come as a shock to some people. And I think we need to talk about that just a little bit. I'm referring to the page, I think it's 13 of 15 in our documents, single family and condo with residential exemption, 21%. Here's what I'm reading off of what I have in front of me, which is that at the highest shift from residential to commercial, that's the 1.75 shift. Medium single family homeowners will experience an 8.5% increase in their taxes. And then if you adjust the shift a little bit downward so that it's not quite as much in the direction of commercial properties, once you get down to 1.702, a little bit less on the commercial properties, a little bit more on the residential properties. And so for that same single family situation, which was 8.5% at the high end of shift, now it's 9.1% at the low end of shift. So, no matter what the shift is, we're talking taxpayers are going to experience an increase in their tax bills, likely increase in their tax bills of 8.5% to 9.1%. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Yes.
It
Okay.
is,
Just want
yes.
to be sure I had that right. And I want to say that, well, Rashid, why don't you tell people why is it not 2.5%, which we've been led to believe, is the law of the land that protects single family property owners from increases more than 2.5% a year? I know there's a good answer to that question, but I'd prefer that you give it.
Well, again, when we looked at the tax levy, the 2.5% is allowable, and the 2.5, that's the maximum we can increase levy from year to year. But added to that, we add the growth and also the debt exclusions. This alone is adding 8.4% to this levy limit.
Yeah.
And without that, as you can see, 2.5% and 1.4 of the growth. That's typical. If there is no override in books, no debt exclusion, the increase you will see is just these two items here. But adding that is a substantial increase. That's one factor, and the other factor I mentioned earlier is the assessments. So valuation in singles, twos, and three families increased at a higher rate than condominiums and rental properties commercial, and that is based on the demand in the real estate market, and that's what we've seen this past. And this is, by the way, calendar year 2020 market that we studied. So that is the reason. Condominiums went up again about 1% from year to year, but also you'll see the median value is pretty close to the residential. Take out the residential exemption, that is a
Right.
substantial savings, and that's why you see a much lower increase in median tax bill.
Yeah.
Now on the commercial, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, in case people are wondering about that, as I understand it, it's not so much that condos get a break over single family homes because they're condos. They get a break because they tend to be valued less. They start out at a lower median value, average value. And the way we structure our real estate property taxes, and I'm in favor of this, is to favor people at the lower end of what they own versus, put the bite on as you get higher and higher in the value ladder in terms of the value of homeowner properties. Is that correct?
That's right. You're correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want people to sort of understand some of these basics. And I also want to specify, in case anyone's wondering, I voted in favor of every one of the debt exclusions that's represented in that percentage of that part of the percentage increase of the likely percentage increase of the taxes. And I obviously the majority of Brookline voters did, but we should always be keeping in mind the impacts of this. Sometimes the impacts fall harder on certain property owners, and we need to keep an eye on that as well. That's my only point in highlighting this particular part of your presentation. Thank you.
Bernard has his hand up. You'll have to unmute.
Sorry.
John, you might want to mute yourself.
Got it.
Yeah. So I just want to also add that the reason for the lower taxes on condominiums has to do with the residential exemption. I mean, condominiums are I think the median value is around 850,000, and 300,000 of that value is just taken off the top. and then they're taxed on the rest. So that, tax is going to be much lower than a $3 million house, which may have a reduction of $300,000, which on $3 million doesn't really mean much. The other thing I think that we ought to think about how we talk about is every year I've noticed that in the tab, now maybe the tab's not really around anymore, but the tab has an article, Brookline Select Board increases taxes on property. And in fact, yes, we do, but I think we need to figure out a way of explaining, what that really means and why it's happening. The main part of which is the fact that housing values have been skyrocketing in Brookline. I mean, people can't always cash that out, but it is value that they're benefiting from, and we're taxing that additional value. I mean, it's a difficult thing to explain, but I think we really need to make an effort so that people have a clear understanding that we're not going crazy with increasing people's taxes.
Any other comments? This is a public hearing, so Kate, let me know if there are any members of the public that wish to speak on this issue.
Chair Hamilton, there are 15 attendees right now, and I don't see anybody using the hand raise feature.
Okay. Please let me know if that changes. I will close the public hearing. We can certainly reopen it if somebody wants to make a comment. And just remind everyone, including my own select board, that we won't be voting on this tonight. So you can ask as many questions as you want of our tax assessors between tonight and next Tuesday when we will vote. I know I will be playing around with these numbers to really understand the trade-offs. Miriam.
Thank you. Thank you for this excellent presentation. And I'm just wondering I think I know where we fall compared to comparative neighborhoods. You showed us Boston, Cambridge, and Newton. The one thing I noticed about Cambridge was that they have a much higher commercial tax base. So I just wonder if it would be possible to get a few more comparative neighborhoods to see where we fall in terms of, everyone always complains we pay such high taxes, but I don't actually think we do compared to our neighbors. And it might be helpful to have some of that framing to actually know, is that true? Are we paying a lot in taxes compared to similar towns, or are we in the middle, or are we less? Is it clear what I'm asking?
Yeah, sure. I think the most comparative community, which is right next door, which is the Newton, has pretty much the same breakdown between the percentage of residential versus commercial breakdown value. And we can see, and Newton doesn't have the residential exemption, and you can see the tax rates are slightly lower in Brookline than Newton. And that's because, again, our values are slightly higher than Newton. But again, comparing Newton to Brookline, I don't think we're paying much more than we're actually paying less than Newton. Sure, Cambridge, it is substantial commercial tax base, so is Boston. We could definitely get you a few more examples of, and I think by neighborhood, you mean by towns, surrounding towns. We could definitely look at some other towns, maybe Watertown and Lexington, surrounding. I can provide you with that.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Anytime.
Yeah, that's helpful to think about.
Sure.
Bernard?
Yeah, I think what would be most helpful is every so often the Globe does a chart showing the tax rates in all Massachusetts municipalities, and we're way down at the bottom, the lowest tax rates. A chart like that sort of gives people like sort of statewide perspective, and of course, we can recognize that different communities have really different, are very different. But getting that statewide list, I think, is helpful. And of course, we can highlight the communities that are relevant or most like Brookline. But the statewide list I find interesting because it shows that our tax rate is among the lowest. Now, of course, tax rate is not what you pay in actual tax money. So, we'd have to caveat that, but it still is an important and interesting thing to look at.
Sure. Yep. Do that.
John, and then I'm going to recognize Susan Grinoff, who I believe wants to speak.
So I just want to add to, excuse me, my colleague Bernard Green's comment. Points very well taken. I'm glad he added at the end that the rate is just the rate. And it's the rate times the value of the average homeowner's, condo owner's property that gets the bill. And one of the reasons Brookline's rate is as low as it is that the value of property in Brookline is so high. And so, and keep in mind, there is this cap, which only allows us to increase the levy by 2.5% a year. So, we're in this situation where that small increase in the levy gets reflected in a tax rate, which won't change very much because it'll only change as much as is sort of proportionate to the levy. And we are in a category where that tax rate, as low as it is, yields tax bills, which might be, in fact, much more in the middle when it comes to comparisons of communities to other communities. And the thing I want to add to what Bernard said is you also have to measure the average person's ability to afford their tax bill. So some communities will have higher tax bills, but they're also wealthier communities. You can look at Nantucket as an example of a community that actually has a lower rate because they're one of the few communities where the average residential property value is even higher than it is in Brookline. But you also have to look at, whether the taxpayer by income and by their situation in life can afford the tax bill when you make these comparisons of communities to each other.
Susan Granoff.
Thank you. In listening to the Chief Assessor's excellent presentation, I was struck by one of the data points. And I don't know which graph or which chart it appeared on, but it seemed to show that the percentage of residential exemption users for condo owners was only about 54%, which means that nearly half of condos are not being occupied by owners. And 54% in comparison to single family homes, which are at 81%. Should this be a concern of ours? Certainly, I think it has implications for how we treat changes to increase affordable housing. It seems as though our property values going up the way it does makes us a very attractive investment target. And more people, including, it's been my personal experience, foreign investors are choosing to invest in our condos simply because they're excellent investments. Maybe we should consider perhaps the fact that our we're only at a 21% residential exemption. Maybe if the residential exemption was at a higher percentage, it might discourage the number of non-occupant homeowners. But that's, I think, from the point of view of what we want our community to be like, having such a huge number of condo owners who don't actually occupy condos is, I think, a real concern for our community. And perhaps it's something that we might want to explore at a later point. Is there any statistics about the trend on this? Has it been increasing over the last decade? Do we have that information?
Yeah, I can certainly get it, but it has been in the middle. It has been about half of the condominiums owner occupied and half rentals, if you want to put it that way. But it has been historically about half. But I can certainly get you the numbers the last 10 or 20 years.
That would be great. I would really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Rashid, what's the denominator on single family homes and condos? Do you happen to know that? If you don't, totally understand if you can get those numbers as well. Just, percentages paint one story, but I want to know, how many total units in both of those categories.
Number of parcels, number of single families?
Yes.
4,578. Condominiums, 10,360, I think.
So 50% of 10,000 is a lot more than 80% of 4,500.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
Miriam.
Thank you. Okay, so I have a comment and a question because I don't understand something Susan said, either I don't understand what we're talking about, or Susan needs clarification, and I don't know the answer to that. So, so first to Susan, I have to say, having been a condo owner and the condos around me were all rented out to BU students, I don't think they're all empty, investors in that sense. Like, those condos are occupied, they're just not owner occupied, which I think is an important distinction. I don't know whether you meant to make it or not, but I think it's worth at least mentioning. I wasn't happy that they were occupied by BU students, but that's a separate issue. So Susan mentioned that if we raise the exemption, that would be less incentive for these condos that are not owner occupied. But I don't understand that, because if we raise the exemption, don't we actually increase the amount that they don't have to pay in taxes? Wouldn't that further encourage them to? I mean, they're not getting these exemptions anyway, right? So it's irrelevant.
So actually, let me try to address this, and then I'll call on Bernard. When somebody says owner occupied, the reason why I think that has been a value is because there is an implicit assumption that that person will invest more in their community because they own the asset and they are living in that asset. You own a property and you don't live there, somebody else does. I think there's an assumption that that person tends to be transient or, won't invest or get as involved in their community. So if you raise the residential exemption, what you're doing is you're incentivizing someone to occupy the unit that they are owning. We can't force people to do things. Property is this very strictly you can buy property. If you have the money to buy it, you can buy it in the US. We do have a lot of foreign investment in town. Brookline is becoming increasingly unaffordable. So in doing that little nudge, you're trying to move, the percentage in a direction that you find favorable. But a lot of people are going to continue to buy property in Brookline as an investment or as a property for son, daughter attending a university. And then that parcel may become an investment property at some point. We can only incentivize, we can't mandate. Bernard, and then I'll give Susan 1 minute to either clarify or say whatever she wants
Heather,
to.
that was very helpful.
Okay,
I think at some point we should just do an assessment. I don't think we should do anything about it, but do an assessment of the impact of foreign-owned property on our tax base, our community generally. Nothing we can do about it because Brookline is sort of the target of a lot of hot international money. But it's probably interesting to understand that a little more. The thing that I would like some information on, Rashid, is there are, at least I know, condo owners and other owners who are residential owners who do not take advantage of the residential exemption. Do we have numbers of, or do we know what the numbers of those individuals are?
That
How many there?
I'm sorry, that occupy the
occupy
home,
their-
but they don't get a residential exemption?
Right, for a variety of reasons.
The only way to do that is match the mailing to the location of the property. If that's, we do have some parcels that the mailing matches the location, but they still don't live there. That's one way of tracking it. If that is, if the ownership is clear, again, sometimes if it's a trust and they don't qualify, they can live there, but they don't qualify for the exemption because it's in the trust or in the an LLC ownership, but certainly we can do that if, but it would be hard to determine who actually occupies.
Would there be a reason to publicize the fact that we have this residential exemption and people should take advantage of it?
We do.
Okay.
So I remember from Gina Franconi telling us maybe a year or so ago that they put in with their tax assessment bills a lot of information. We try to get the word out, but again, this is on people to investigate for themselves. We can only do so much. I don't know how much staff time that would take and how much postage that would take. I understand that we already take measures to advertise these programs. I want to give Susan an opportunity to say something, then I will recognize Justin and then Miriam.
Okay, thank you. I don't have a whole lot to say at this point that hasn't already been said, other than the fact that I live in a 3-unit condo and one of the units is owned by a foreign national and it's been unoccupied for the last 18 months. And I don't know if this is something that is worth pursuing to see how many units are owned by foreign nationals and how many are actually left empty for some of the time. But again, I think that if we are trying to maximize occupancy in Brookline and making it affordable, having units that are literally empty is not going to help. So that's something that I think is worth studying at some degree greater than what we're currently doing. And thank you. I have an advisory committee meeting that I must now switch over to. So thank you so much.
Of course. See you tonight at town meeting.
Yep.
Justin and then Miriam.
Chair Helmut, I just want to say quickly, because I know you want to move on. What you're referencing with Gina is previously we used to have an insert that went out with our tax bills that had some of that information about the residential exemption. We can include those in the future as well, but we have that information online. It is on the onus is on the residential taxpayer, whoever, to apply for that exemption. But yes.
Thank you. If we can try to do that at least once a year, depending on the budget, I think that would be helpful. Miriam.
Okay, very quickly, because I think it's important for those listening that this is, and I'm going to steal Mel's words, this is a zero-sum game. If we increase the exemption for residential taxpayers, then we are moving that burden onto commercial taxpayers. And I just don't, I really struggle. I just don't think this is the time to further burden commercial properties, right? Especially we are still in the pandemic, commercial industries are really struggling. So I just want to say that I think that's an important thing to consider in this conversation.
And don't we also shift it on to other residential properties, higher end? So
it shifted towards the residential class only, the residential exemption.
Okay, so so commercial does not have to see their taxes increased.
There's not.
Wait, no, but if we change the residential, if we change the exclusion percentage, then that money, that percentage changes for commercial, correct?
No, changing the residential exemption, increasing it, only shifts the taxes within the residential tax class.
There's two things. There's the exemption, the residential exemption, which I don't think you're referring to, Miriam. I think you were talking about classification, which shifts from residential to commercial. And it is true that it's a zero-sum game. So the amount that's lost is gained somewhere else.
So this is very important to understand, and we should take the next week to, do a deep dive. We're running out of time to continue asking questions about it here because we really need to vote on redistricting. I understand Sasan had his hand up. If it's on, Sasan, is it on the tax classification or is it on something else?
Okay. Quick, I have one comment and a question. One is, I know New York City implemented a process where they would not allow insurance companies to give insurance to companies that are held by offshore LLCs. So that's the comment. And then question is, you mentioned that people who put their houses in trust do not qualify for a tax exempt. And I know many parents and families, especially with COVID, they put their assets in trust in case someone passes away. So how come they don't want, how come protecting their assets for their kids disqualify them from getting the exemption?
Rashid?
I can answer. Yeah, I can answer that. No, I did say they don't qualify. The certain circumstances they don't. In a trust, the occupant has to be a trustee and beneficiary of the trust. That qualifies them for the residential exemption. If if one of the conditions is not met, then they don't qualify.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, so for any other questions, contact a member of the select board or Rashid, who is with the tax assessor's office, and we will try to get back to you before the board votes next Tuesday. I will close this public hearing. We need to move on to redistricting. Any objections? Thank you so much, Rashid.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Kate, please promote Ben Kaufman if he is with us. Otherwise, promote Dave Gayshak.
I promoted both Dave and Ben.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Somebody needs to take down the assessors. Okay, thank you. How do we want to do this? Ben, do you just want to kind of summarize something, and then I guess we will talk amongst ourselves, but I know there are a number of people that want to be heard that are attending this meeting. So I want to go to public comment as soon as we can. So Ben, first.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and apologies in advance. I'm calling in from the high school auditorium. So if there is some chatter in the background, it's just town meeting getting set up. Last week, we presented 2 maps to the select board. One of them was the recommended map from the redistricting committee, which was a 17 precinct map. There was also a request for a 16 precinct map. This was not a map that was recommended by the committee, but was one that we presented last week. And I also know that since then there has been a potential amendment floated to the 17 precinct map, a small switch that only affects precincts 13 and 14 and not the rest of the map. So I do have maps available. If anybody would like for me to share them, I'm happy to share my screen and show them to people, but otherwise I will follow your directions.
Where did John go? Miriam.
Thank you. So I would like to propose an amendment that Ben just referred to, looking at precinct 13 and 14. So originally there was a swap proposed so that there would be fewer town meeting members affected by the redistricting in precincts 13 and 14. What ended up, my understanding, what ended up was a compromise a kind of half, we'll call it the partial swap compromise. I would like to propose a 3/4 swap that puts a few more families closer to their polling locations. It doesn't affect any town meeting members. It only affects 13 and 14. And the only reason we're talking about 13 and 14 is because of the initial pushback from precinct 13 and 14 members and town meeting members that resulted in the initial discussion about a swap and a compromise. And so what I'm hoping is that we would consider these other families and the priority that has been outlined by the redistricting committee, which is to get more families closer to their polling stations. So this does that. It affects about, and Ben or Dave can speak and correct me if I'm wrong, but it affects about 300 families in 13 and 314. Again, the goal is to get them closer to their polling stations. It doesn't affect any sitting town meeting members.
Okay. John, do you still want to push for a 16 map, or can we concentrate on 17 precincts?
I would like to take 3 minutes to just make the case for the 16 precinct map.
Okay, please do so now.
And Ben, if possible, I don't know if Ben has screen sharing power right now, but I'm going to reference, 16 occasionally and 17 occasionally. And if he wants to put that up on the screen so people can see the map, that's fine. If not, I'll just stay on the screen myself. So the chair has extended me the courtesy of speaking in favor of the 16 precinct map as drafted by the redistricting committee. And I thank her for doing so. So why do I favor the 16 precinct map? The answer lies in the priorities established by the redistricting committee itself. Let's start with the priorities where I find no obvious advantage to either version of redistricting, the 16 or the 17 precinct version. This applies to the following criteria. Accessibility, as far as I know, the polling sites will be the same regardless of the maps and will be required to be accessible. So no difference here. No difference that I can discern when it comes to quote unquote integrity of neighborhoods. No difference when it comes to the total number of town meeting members. And I would also argue that there is no substantial difference when it comes to so-called geographic compactness. Map 16 isn't perfect, but neither is map 17, with peninsulas in precincts 4, 9, and 14 shooting off in all directions. So that's 4 priorities on which the contest between 16 and 17 is a draw. Now, here are the priorities where the map of 17 precincts comes out ahead. First, equity, equality, and maximize majority-minority precincts. Yes, under 17, there are 2 precincts that tip ever so slightly non-white over white, just a smidgen over 50%. By contrast, under the 16 precinct map, the 2 highest non-white percentages are 46% each. It's a small difference, but the numbers are what they are. Next, walkability to the polls. Yes, advantage to the 17 precinct map. Next, creating precincts around school districts. I can't prove it, but I suspect the 17 precinct map is a little better in this regard. So that's 4 priorities on which the 17 precinct map has the advantage. And just to remind you, the no advantage either map also has 4 points, scores 4 points. Finally, here are the priorities on which the 16 precinct map comes out ahead. Minimize changes to current precincts. 16 is better since it keeps precincts mostly where they are. Reassignment of residents to new precincts. Again, 16, better. Limit the number of so-called AB precincts, those split between 2 state representatives. Clear advantage to the 16 precinct map with just 1 AB versus 3 for map 7, the 17 precinct map. Keep precinct populations as close as possible to equal. Huge advantage to the 16 precinct map. Just check the spreadsheet where 16 and 17 are compared by deviation from the mean of population of the precincts. And finally, maintain the same number of town meeting members per precinct. Clear advantage to map the 16 precinct map, where the number varies by at most 3, whereas the 17 precinct maps numbers are literally all over the map, from a low of just 6 to a high of 20. And that brings me to the winner in this contest, the 16 precinct map. It comes out ahead on 5 priorities of the redistricting committee versus the 17 precinct map with just 4 priorities. And there are 4 priorities on which the contest is a draw. And finally, let me be clear, the 17 precinct map is a good map, but judged by the priorities of the redistricting committee, the 16 precinct map is better. When it comes to addressing the needs of voters, I believe good is good, but better is better. My vote is for the 16 precinct map.
Okay, at this time, I really want to get to public comment. So I will open the public hearing, and I know a few people want to be heard. There was a Jenny that wanted to be heard. Jenny.
Jenny Lewis?
Yes, if you can promote her, and then Marty Rosenthal, if he is in attendance, he said that he wanted to make a comment. And then if people want to contact Kate McGilvery or myself to indicate that you want to make a comment before the select board on redistricting, we can promote you so that we can see your video and you can unmute yourself. Jenny first. Ben, if you can pull back up the map that showed what Miriam had talked about. And you will be limited to 2.5 minutes.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I'd like to make a comment on this new map, which has just emerged after the redistricting committee spent enormous amount of time creating a compromise map for precinct 13. I'd like to remind you that 100 voters in precinct 13 originally sent the committee a letter asking for P13 to be kept intact. But for various reasons, a compromise agreement was made to split P13 at Reservoir Road. So a large part of P13 would already be absorbed into P14. That's the map that we've been assuming would come in front of the select board tonight. Now at the last minute, without the consideration of the redistricting committee, a new map has appeared. This new map, I live in 8 Penniman Road, precinct 13. This new map is unacceptable. It completely decimates the remaining neighborhood of P13 south of Chestnut Hill Avenue. I am at 8 Penniman Road. Only the house next door will be in P13, not my neighbors across the street, not my neighbors within 100 yards of me. My neighborhood has been on this map reduced to something that looks like the tail of a snake, incorporating only Clinton Road and a more small select section of Elliott leading towards Heath. The rest of P13 is on the other side of Chestnut Hill Avenue, which has never been part of my neighborhood. So for many reasons, I'm asking you to reject this map and return to the compromise. This is not a necessary change. The idea that it is being made purely on the walkability issue is, I think, unacceptable. The other main priorities of the committee, which were to minimize changes for voters, to keep neighborhoods together, to not split roads unnecessarily, all have been ignored on this map. I would ask you to reject this map out of hand and return to the compromise which you had before you before this map appeared. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Marty Rosenthal in attendance?
Yes.
Okay, you have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. And I think I can well do it within 2.5 minutes because I sent a long email a day or two ago. The flaw I see in, I think it's the majority proposal is Mason Terrace being moved from 11 into 9. And I believe that violates at least 6 of the priorities of the committee: accessible to disabled and elderly, integrity of neighborhood associations, walkability to polls, precincts around school districts, don't minimize changes to current precincts and reassignment of residents to new precincts, and geographical compactness. This is reminding me of the expression from Casablanca about this don't amount to a hill of beans. But these people are on a hill of more than beans, and putting those people into precinct 9 is ridiculous, frankly. And I wish I had chimed in earlier. I don't know what discussions were had on the committee by the precinct 9 and precinct 11 people, but whatever discussions happened, this is a bad result. Those people are foreigners to precinct 9. And I've explained why in my lengthy email. So I see this as a lose, 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 lose. Lose for the residents, lose for the town meeting members in both precincts, and lose for the sense of community that our town meeting represents. So I'm just seeing the proposal by John with 16 precincts, and I think that would remedy what I'm talking about. And for that reason alone, I hope it'll get some serious consideration. I wish I had not been so busy for the last month and I'd been able to weigh in earlier, but what can you do? I'm only human. Thank you.
I believe Sasan Zelka wanted to speak.
Yes, I'm Susan Zelsa, town meeting member from Precinct 14, member of the redistricting committee. I'd like to thank both you, Heather, and Dave for working for past 6 weeks with the rest of the members on the compromise map. My comments are addressed to both John and Miriam. We worked extremely hard to come up with a compromise that takes input from the neighborhood as well as balances out all the criteria we had. And the compromise map is a map that, in my opinion, should be considered. This last minute change did not have input from the community. The comment that we only got comments from town meeting members is incorrect. We got 100 letters and 24 letters from both Precinct 14 members as well as Precinct 13 residents who opposed these drastic changes. This particular change, which I'm seeing right now, it looks surgical. And I'm personally against this particular change. And I hope that the select would consider the compromise that the redistricting committee worked hard for 6 weeks to come up with. And thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan Fine.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Madam Chair? Yes, thank you very much. I had the privilege, the honor and privilege of representing Precinct 13 for 39 years in town meeting. And I spoke before the committee about urging that it be left untouched because it's, in my opinion, one of the most, if not the most diverse precinct in the town, including single family homes, apartments, the commercial area in Washington Square. It goes from Washington Square down to the Newton Town Line by the Chestnut Hill Post Office. However, we were willing to go along with a compromise that David Gages and Sasan worked out. And this last minute proposal would decimate a neighborhood to take out the blocks from Dean Road towards the Riverside line, would just cut the neighborhood, would just decimate the neighborhood, and serves no useful purpose, does not make any sense at all. And I would urge the board to go along with the compromise that was worked out by the redistricting committee, was given a lot of consideration. And those of us who favored the original 16 precinct are willing to, many of us are willing to go along with it. And that's what we feel the board should endorse. I would ask that the proposed amendment be turned down. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Carol Caro wants to speak. And then I know we got an email from Jenny Siegel. I've agreed for Miriam to read that so that everyone can hear her words.
Jenny Siegel, I think is Jim's daughter.
Yeah. Heather, should I start?
Hold on.
Okay.
Kate, can you demote Jonathan Fine since he is not muted? And it is very distracting. Thank you. Carol, you may begin.
Well, I was very interested in seeing the map that was proposed because I did attend some of the hearings that were available to the public to discuss this. I've been in Precinct 10 for, I guess it's about 6 or 8 years now, and I've always felt that we were the tail at the end of the dog, as Precinct 10 was. And I also felt that we should be included in the area north of Brookline, north of Beacon Street, because that's where our neighborhood is. I can adjust to the idea that 17 may cross Beacon Street, but it was really important to me, and I think to some of my neighbors, that we were in a precinct that was going to have some say about what was going on in Waldo Durgan, which is smack in the middle of our neighborhood. So I'm very pleased with the map that is being presented. And the other thing I'd like to say I'm very pleased with is that everybody is going to have to run for re-election. I served on the redistricting committee 10 years ago, and the fight was always about, well, if you change my precinct, then I'm going to have to run for, everyone's going to have to run for re-election. And I thought it would be a great thing if everybody had to run, no matter whether their precinct was adjusted or not. So I'm very much in favor of this presenting by the redistricting committee. Thanks.
Ryan Black would like to be heard.
Thank you, Chair Hamilton. And forgive me if I'm not my most articulate. I wasn't planning on speaking, but frankly, I think it's quite sad that we have a number of incumbents who've throughout either now or during the whole process have essentially complained about the map, and in varying degrees, like the committee or the select board, have acquiesced and redrew the precinct lines. And this standard was not applied evenly. It was really only for the benefit of, by my estimate, maybe precincts 13, 14, 7, and 8, and specifically the town meeting members from those precincts, not those precincts. And to be clear, those individuals have the right to say whatever they wanted during the proceedings, but let's not mince words. They acted not to protect any neighborhoods, but their incumbents' seats. Frankly, I think it's selfish for incumbents to demand that protecting their seats be a higher priority than polling places being close for people. And additionally, I think it's this fear-mongering over losses of institutional knowledge should, incumbent town meeting members be in a newish precinct. I think that's off base, because frankly, if they have the ability to go to voters and go, hey, I have all this institutional knowledge, I think this is valuable. And then the voters can go, yeah, I think that's valuable. I'm going to re-elect you to the town meeting, even though you're newish to my precinct. So I'll end there.
Thank you. If anybody else wishes to speak, please hit me up in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to ask Miriam to read Jenny Siegel's letter.
Thank you. And I just want to say that I've chosen Jenny's letter, but I spoke to at least 4 other families tonight who support this, but they're parents and they can't join a select board meeting at 6 o'clock or 6:30 because they're picking their kids up from hockey or taking their kids to math or whatever it is, giving them dinner. This is just impossible for them in terms of participating, which it makes to me all the more reason that we should be listening to their voices to get them to the polls to vote. So I chose Jenny's letter because I think it encompasses the issue for me the most. It has come to my attention that the select board will be discussing polling places tonight. My children go to Heath School. We live on Clinton Road at Elliott Street. We moved recently from Loveland and have always voted at Heath when my kids would get dropped off at school. I'm writing to add to the voices that live close to Heath but must vote at Runkle and request you take our address into consideration for voting. It will make voting much easier for families near the school. Others I know in precinct 14 voted Heath, but live feet from Runkle, which also makes little sense. Thanks, Jenny Siegel, precinct 13, 425 Clinton Road. And this is what this is hoping to address. For those families that live at Runkle and those families that live at Heath, what we want to do is make voting easier. I think that's the point. And we want to make it easier for people who have a harder time to get to the polls, precisely because their parents, and it limits their free time during the day. So I appreciate that this is a last minute change. It's not what I would consider in a town of 60,000 people, 600 families. What is that? I can do math. 1%. It's a small change. I invite Ben or Dave to clarify or add anything that they like. But I think that these are the people we should also be listening to, and know they don't have a lot of political power, and know they don't have time to join select board meetings, but their needs should be honored also. And to be perfectly clear, I want to be absolutely clear. I think the redistricting committee did a fabulous job. I'm absolutely amazed at how thoughtful and hardworking everyone has been. I'm just making what I hope is a tiny fix for, again, to respond to the compromise, to this whole swap that was put forward. So thank you.
John.
A point was raised that I just wanted to respond to briefly. And it was raised rather eloquently that it's sad if town meeting members do something in a way that is purely self-protective. But I think we should also keep in mind, it's easy to make that argument when you're from a precinct from which only one town meeting member will have to be removed and put into a different precinct, whereas 2 precincts over from that precinct, there's a precinct where 10 town meeting members are being removed and put into a different precinct. So, yes, eloquence is fine as far as it goes, but we also got to look at the numbers and the facts. Thanks.
Dave Gashok.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And to be clear, speaking only for myself here, not in any role for the committee. Actually, I found Select Board Member Van Scoyak's comment there notable, because actually I was the original proponent of the full swap version of 13 and 14, which would have actually put me as an incumbent town meeting member would have moved me to 14, and in the midst of what I understand to be quite a large number of incumbents. So not at all the situation that Select Board Member Van Scoyak described. In fact, the exact opposite. But the point of the full swap, as proposed, was to bring as many voters as we could, as close to and with as much ease of access to their polling places as we could. That full swap ran into some other, concerns that were raised and, driven by some of my colleagues that I have a high degree of respect for. And so we ended up with a partial swap that moved about 600 or 700 people, particularly along Beacon Street, closer to their polling place by reassigning them to Runkle. I'm intrigued by the 3/4 swap because it seems to thread the difference between, it brings another 300 people on each end of it, a lot closer to their polling places, while not moving any more incumbent town meeting members, which I think was among the primary concerns about the full swap. I think the full swap is still the best policy choice. The partial was a good compromise. This is also a good compromise that may be an even better one. But again, those are my own comments, not the committee's. The committee did vote deadlocked 8-8 in favor of the on the full swap, but voted near unanimously after that failed for the partial swap.
Raul.
Sure. I'm just wondering if our town clerk can just weigh in, not to tell us which one you favor, but the proposal that Miriam's brought forward, Ben, if you could just tell us what you see as any potential negative side effects of that proposal.
Thank you, Select Board Member Fernandez. I think that the partial swap and the 3/4 swap both are very similar in terms of how the town clerk's office would handle a change like this. Both of them, you create two AB precincts. In both of them, you don't affect the majority minority precincts. And in both of them, you are moving people who currently are farther away from their polling location closer to their polling location. So from the perspective of the town clerk's office, there are not many additional negatives from a elections operations perspective for this kind of a swap, because the change ends up being fairly equal whether you do the full swap or the 3/4 swap.
Thank you. Heather, if I can, I'll just say, I think on the I thought we discussed this last time around, but on the 16, I just a no. It's just too dramatically different than what the committee was able to reach unanimous consensus on. I'd said before that I'd be willing to consider a change if it was smaller in nature and that the benefits significantly outweighed, any drawbacks. I think what to the comments that we heard earlier, I get it. We could probably have people from every single precinct line up and tell us that they don't like the way a line was drawn, or that it's going to break up, them and their neighbors in some way, shape, or form. And this is something that I know that the committee, has had to deal with throughout all of this. But we've got to, I think as a board, we've got to take a larger picture view of the kinds of changes that we want to make and how it's going to benefit communities in a larger way. And I'm not swayed at all by any impacts on town meeting members. In fact, it's not something that I follow closely, how, changes would impact, town meeting members that I know, because I didn't want that to sway my vote at all in this. So I'd be open and willing to consider Miriam's proposal if there was other support on the board for it. Because it gets people closer to their polling places without seemingly, impacting some of the other high priorities that the committee set for their work. So I'll leave it at that.
Any other comments by the public? Otherwise, I will close the public hearing. I've really been grappling with this. I really wanted a unanimous select board on this one, and I'm very proud of the work that the committee did. And my personal feelings about the full swap, I think that if we had had more time, I would have felt more comfortable considering the full swap. And before I go too much into my other thoughts, I'm going to recognize Bernard, who has not really spoken yet.
Thank you, Heather. I sort of want to kind of deviate off the current topic and sort of make a personal statement because of something that has come up. Last week, I asked some what I thought were reasonable questions regarding the purpose of majority-minority precincts in the Brookline context. And the other question was, how are we addressing the interests of our dwindling Black population in Brookline? I'm raising this because apparently some people don't think such questions should be asked, and have suggested that I was denigrating the Asian population and questioning the history of racism and discrimination that America's Asian population has been subjected to. Though as a Black person, I don't think that it's useful to ever compare oppressions, because that is how we divide and defeat ourselves. And I'm only mentioning this because I hear that you can read a tirade against me on these and other issues in Thursday's tab. So that's a personal statement. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm certainly not in favor of a precinct 16 map. I will just say that. The thing that sank that battleship for me was when you look at the numbers of the total population, and they are within one or two people of being at the 4,000 cutoff. We know that there's going to be growth in the next 10 years. And I personally find that undemocratic to have more than 4,000 people in one precinct for the next 9 or even 5 years. Miriam?
All right. So On the 16 precincts, the first thing I'm going to say is we need to have minority districts, period, end of story. And 16 precincts doesn't do that. So that does not have my support in any way, shape, or form. On my proposal for the 3/4 swap, I still think it is the right thing to do. I still think that we are bowing to a compromise, which basically equates to gerrymandering. So I'm going to say it, and I want it in the record. But having said that, it appears that I don't have the support for that. And so I will withdraw that amendment.
I appreciate that, Miriam. One of the things, and I just want to note that we are running very short on time, so I will say a few things. Believe me, it pains me that not everybody gets, what they wanted out of this map, but I think that it is a step in the right direction. Nathan Spritz is going to try to catalog some of the things that we wish we had known when we started this process. And I am planning on writing a lot of things. And it's just kind of amusing to me that 10 years ago, when the committee did this same exercise and it came to the select board, I believe the select board changed something at the last minute regarding Heath School. I think the committee had proposed that it go into precinct 13, and the select board actually put it back into precinct 14. So this swap is something that every single committee has talked about in the past 20 years. And it will just, evolve over time. I do apologize, Miriam, that we're not there at this point, but I will include it in my written remarks to the future chair of the redistricting, that this is something that needs to be really looked at early on, and outreach specifically, because a lot of people think that they know exactly what their neighbors feel. And, it's just really hard to get compromise right here. So we're going to take a vote, but before we do, Marty Rosenthal had raised the issue about Mason Terrace, and Ben Kaufman, if you can just briefly talk about why that ended up in precinct 9. I think that would be very helpful. And then I will move adoption of the committee's recommended precinct 17 map. Ben?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the comments from my former colleague in Precinct 9. I had the pleasure of representing Precinct 9 in town meeting for a number of years as well. When it came to Precinct 11, there was an issue we faced where for a 17 precinct map, it did need to shrink in population. And there were only 3 directions you could shrink it from. If you shrank it along the 11-13 border, you would create a new AB precinct. In fact, under the swap, it would be an ABC precinct, which the town clerk's office strongly recommended against because of the difficulties that would pose. If you were to do it from the south, it would cross Beacon Street, a barrier that in that area is more than just a street with a train down the middle, but a street with a hill and a train down the middle. And that was something that was not desirable to do. So the other place to move Precinct 11 was along the border with Precinct 9. And there are 3 census blocks that border there, and they are all incredibly large. So the census block that was moved had about 227 people in it, which allowed Precinct 11 to stay within the 5% margin of error. The other suggestion was to have Atherton Road and a block that was bounded by that in Winchester moved in, which while it would have been desirable from a neighborhood's perspective, that census block had 440 people in it. So if it were to be moved, it would have actually brought Precinct 11 outside of the margin of error. So as a result, the single census block that is currently in this map is in Precinct 9 was moved. While there are, some questions about that neighborhood, that does move a number of residents along Winchester Street into a precinct with their neighbors across the street. And it also moves all of the residents in that census block closer to a potential polling location at the senior center versus at the Driscoll School. So that was the thought process around that particular census block moving.
Great. Thank you, Ben. Can you bring up the map that the committee voted on? And then I will move approval of this map. The
Madam Chair,
so
this map.
is this the map, Ben?
Yes, Madam Chair, the map currently on screen, the Brookline re-precincting map 11/18/2021 was
Okay.
the map that was recommended by the redistricting committee.
So there are 3 AB precincts in this proposed precinct 5, precinct 13, and is it precinct 12?
Precinct 5, precinct 13, and precinct 14 will be AB precincts, and precinct 2 and precinct 4 are majority minority precincts.
Great. So I will call the
Could we
roll.
Excuse me, could we
Yes.
ask Ben to explain when the AB precinct is? That was a question in the chat room. Just for our audience.
Keep it very brief. We have to adjourn so that Big can go to town meeting. And this question was asked last week and answered by Ben.
Apparently someone wasn't here.
An AB precinct is a precinct split by a state representative district. So some voters will vote for one rep, some voters will vote for the other rep. All voters will vote at the same polling location. And there are 3 of them in this map.
Right. Very concise. So knowing that Big has to leave us to then do town meeting, I really want to get to the vote. If there are no objections or other discussion, I will move adoption of the re-precincting map that the re-precincting committee worked on. All those in favor? Bernard.
Aye.
Raul.
With thanks to the committee, folks who participated in public comment, and to my colleagues for a good conversation on the board. Aye.
John.
Seconding my colleague, Dr. Fernandez's comments, aye.
Miriam.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Thank you very, very much. So let's go to town meeting. Thank you to Big.
Well done, Chair.